You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show. Yes, you made it to Friday evening and it's exciting to be here and chatting to my friend Chris Hooley. Hello, Chris.
Sorry, the comments in the chat are already making me laugh. It's going off early doors.
This is why we urge you people to subscribe if you're listening on the podcast or you don't get to tuning live. Just do it once in a while because we've got some people in the chat that have watched the show for quite a while and they can be a little bit devious, shall I say, in the nicest kind of way. Yeah,
Brandon, no fingers or fists pointing in your direction, that's for sure.
Oh, indeed. How's your week been, Chris?
Yeah, it's been very busy. I mean, it's just gone by in a bit of a blur, to be honest. But yeah, exciting times. Bit more AI stuff that I've been looking into, which has been exciting.
Nice.
Been looking at different ways to film live for Harrogate. Obviously, that's on the horizon. So yeah, it's very exciting in the Writing Community Chat Show space and world at the minute because there's a lot of good things coming very soon.
And we did sell one copy of our non-proof book before it became unavailable.
To be honest, I noticed that.
It's Connor tried to buy our book, which is a print-on-demand book, and it said it was unavailable. I think they're trying to boycott us, Chris. Anyway, just before I was setting this show up, I saw this and I had to screenshot it and talk to you about it. It's non-book related, but I thought it was hilarious.
Is it ET related? Because if it is,
it could be space. It's space related, but not ET.
Okay, maybe. That's all right. As long as you don't get a little picture of Spielberg.
Just the title amazed me. It says, an asteroid the size of 18 walruses to pass Earth on Sunday.
Amazing.
It is amazing. Why would you use the comparison of 18 walruses to pass Earth? I don't understand that.
But does anyone know how big one walrus is? Like in terms of feet or inches? Or, I mean, somebody out there could probably look that up in terms of what we're looking at with 18 walruses.
I mean, is it just to confuse us so we don't panic that it's actually massive?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But it does say it's going to pass us by, so we could give it a little bit of a wave, and then what's it going to do? Explode into the sun, maybe?
You never know. Just don't panic with all the people, Chris. There's a lot of panickers out there. Right. Okay. So we have an exciting show on tonight, Chris, because we've got two amazing guests on, which is incredible. And when we set the show up, we always look at the kind of the profile and the bio of these authors, and I really feel like these two can also have their own shows as well. So we're going to have to potentially see what we can get out of them, but there's going to be a lot we're going to miss. But what we're going to look at is the fact that they've combined together to create these books, and also their processes as writing as a duo, and of course this book, The Long March Home, which is above your head there, Chris. Wonderful looking book that's received a lot of amazing praise. So what we're going to do, we're going to bring one guest on for a couple of minutes. We're going to learn a little bit about their backstory. Then we're going to bring on the next guest and do the same. And then we'll bring them on together. For you guys watching, you can send in your questions about all this. If you're ever interested in writing as a pair, or if that's something you're now embarking on and that's the thing that's happening to you, please use this as an opportunity for you to learn about some things that might help you on that journey as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to learn a lot about this because I'm currently in a threesome.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
not for the first time, Chris. I believe
little writing tripod. So yeah, I'm looking forward to tonight's interview.
Oh, fantastic! I'm surely that'll spark up a few comments in the chat there. So tonight I'm going to introduce our first guest. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm sure, like you said, we're going to get a lot of value out of this as well as hopefully some good stories too. So the very first guest we will speak to is both of these guests are New York Times bestsellers, which is amazing. Is a New York Times bestselling award-winning author whose books have appeared on the IndieBound bestsellers list and the Library Journal's best of lists, which is amazing to receive all of those things. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tosca Lee. Hello, Tosca.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm great. It's great to see you both. And hello, everybody who's joining us live.
Fantastic. Yeah, sorry, I can't stop. Not look at the comments. Tosca, where are you coming from today in the world?
I live in Nebraska, right in the middle of the U.S. My husband's a farmer, so I'm right out in rural Nebraska, and my husband's out farming right now.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Yeah. So you have a lot of time for your writing then?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, I do.
Yeah.
This is where I do it. It's really quiet. It's beautiful. It's very green right now.
Yeah. Do you have a good window view for your writing?
I do. I would turn it and show it to you, but I've actually put the shade down just to keep the glare. So
Brandon says, Tosca, I'm in Omaha.
Oh gosh, hi Brandon.
Is that close?
Like 40 minutes from where I am.
Okay. Wicked. So Tosca, we're going to try and do this a bit more speedy than we usually do, because obviously there's two of you today, and we'd love to get back into the backstory of yours as well as our next guest, but we want to try and keep it fairly brief. So can we kind of discuss how your writing journey possibly started at the very start, but also about how you kind of feel that your career's developed in that sense, and how your writing is at the moment?
So I never meant to become a writer, actually. As a young person, as a kid, I wanted to become a classical ballerina. And that was my whole goal. And I dedicated myself to that end. And I danced semi-professionally with companies when I was a teenager until I got injured. And so having been injured, I thought maybe I need to consider some other things. So I went off to, by the way, I used to dance with the Omaha Ballet back in the day. I went off to college in Massachusetts, and I came home to Nebraska, where I grew up, for spring break. I'm the only person I know who goes to Nebraska for spring break. And I was in a car with my dad, and I was talking about great books and how wonderful books are like roller coaster rides with twists and turns. And this was 1989. And I blurted out in the car that day, I think I'd like to write a book. And my dad made me a deal. He said, okay, Tosca, I will pay you what you would have made working at the bank. I was supposed to work as a bank teller for the second summer in a row. I was a bad bank teller because I'm not good at math. And apparently they want you to keep track of money and, whatever. So he said, I'll pay you what you would have made if you will write your first novel, do it full time, and treat it like a job. And I snatched that up. And that summer, I wrote my first novel about the Neolithic people of Stonehenge. Wow. Because I've always been fascinated with Stonehenge. And it was a very bad novel, but that one never got published. But I was hooked, and I've been doing it ever since. And so the journey's been wild and crazy. And here we are many years later, and 12 novels later for me. And I'm living the life.
It's incredible. I mean, that is a fantastic thing for someone who supports you in that way, to give you the opportunity to do that. And that doesn't happen for a lot of people. But obviously, did that drive you to want to really make the effort and to make that a success?
I'd like to say yes. I think at the time I kind of wanted to dabble in writing and not work at the bank. So there was that. But I did write 8 hours a day, and I did accomplish that book in only 2 months, because I forgot my dad had signed me up to go to Oxford and study economics for the first part of the summer, which is more math. But I survived.
Does anyone actually like maths? I don't think so.
Quickly. So
so that story that you wrote 12 books ago that didn't get published, have you ever thought about sparking that back up?
Yeah, no, it's in the basement with the skeletons where it belongs. I would be so scared to read. I'd be embarrassed. I know it's bad. I know it is. So
have you been to Stonehenge?
Oh, many times.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it's really cool. I'm into all the kind of ancient wonders. I've been there. I've been to Avebury. I've been to all the different henges, and I always enjoy those kind of wonders of the world.
Amazing. Right, Tosca, thank you so much for introducing yourself. We will pop you back off screen, and we'll introduce our next guest, and then we'll get you back on. So amazing. Great story. I can't believe that introduction, how she got into writing there, Chris. That's a wonderful opportunity.
I mean, we've interviewed loads of guests, and we've never, ever had that, origin story, so to speak. So nice. Fantastic.
So our next guest, who is called Marcus, he's 4 of his books are New York Times bestsellers, 5 are national bestsellers, 4 have been optioned for movies, 3 have received Booklist starred reviews, 1 received a Publisher's Weekly starred review, and 1 is an international bestseller as well. All incredible things to achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marcus Brotherton. Hello, Marcus. How are you doing?
Hi.
It's amazing to have you here with us, and thank you for taking the time to do so. Where in the world are you coming from?
So I'm in Bellingham, Washington. I'm just north of Seattle. I was telling the guys just before the show that I actually grew up in British Columbia, so I feel part of the Commonwealth, Wales and Manchester, was it? So hello to all our international friends as well.
Amazing. Well, yeah, it's amazing. We've had like sunshine the past couple of days, and it hailstoned earlier, and then hammered down with rain. So yeah, we're really having a good start to the spring and summer. But Marcus, thank you so much again. As I said, we're excited to talk about the Long March Home, but also your career has been fantastic, and you've written a lot of things that are kind of an interest of mine. Looking at military history and things like that as well. So we would love to learn a little bit about how you got into that and why that subject particularly is something of interest to you.
I started my writing career as a newspaper reporter and was in a newsroom for 5 years. I had sort of great aspirations of climbing the ranks and going to a large city daily and being a columnist. That was kind of my dream. And it was just, in some ways, bad timing, but looking back on it now, it's really fortunate timing because the newspaper industry was going downhill right when I got involved, and it was everything was going digitized, and so I knew that it was going to be a long, steep slog to get up this hill. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there was probably better ways to write, and so. I had a former professor in college, and he had left academia and gone on to the book world. He was working at Random House at the time as a executive editor. Called him out of the blue and said, "Hey, do you remember me?" And fortunately, he did, and we had a great talk about what comes next. And he started sending me some freelance projects in the book world, and fantastic. I loved books, and eventually my freelance work overtook everything else, and I went full-time in books in 2005. Never looked back.
It's incredible. I mean, one of your books is the Band of Brothers Untold Stories, as well as similar stories in the Pacific as well. It's an amazing TV series that I've watched numerous times, but often you see the main characters portrayed in that and their stories. What made you want to write about the stories of the people in the background of that story?
It was, again, it was kind of being at the right place at the right time. My agent knew the attorney for Lieutenant Buck Compton. So my agent called me up one day. He's like, "Hey, did you ever see Band of Brothers?" I'm like, "Absolutely." He said, "Well, Lieutenant Compton, he kind of lives in your area. He's about 45 minutes from you. Interested in writing his memoir. Would you be interested in working with him?" And, just automatically I said, "Yes, absolutely. Sign me up." I hung up the phone, and then I'm like, what have I done? I mean, I grew up in Canada. What do I know about the American military? But I started to read in depth. I read 20 books just cover to cover, just to prep for Buck Compton. And then we started to work together, and he was a very just sort of gracious guide and introduced me to his world. Along the way, I met a number of his friends in Easy Company, and that's how we got going on We Are Alive and Remain. And the book did very well, mostly because of the men involved, and as opposed to me, and that started it off. So for probably 8 to 10 years, that's almost all I did was interview World War II veterans.
Wow, that's incredible. Really is. I mean, did you feel a pressure as a writer, even with the experience that you had, to portray their story and to feel like you had to do justice to that? How did you feel about that as a writer?
Yeah, I felt like like 18 walruses trying to earth, I guess. Yeah, it was a mammoth undertaking. They're tough guys, and they don't automatically trust, because why would they? If I'm coming along saying, "Hey, I want to tell your story," like I've sat in book signings with these men, and I mean the line of people seeking their autographs will reach out the door for an hour, sort of in the hot sun. So they had received this spotlight due to the miniseries band of brothers, and then they had this massive following. So I was very fortunate that Buck vouched for me, and he said, "Hey, he worked with me on my book. He did a great job. You can trust this kid." And Buck was really my ticket in, and I give him so much credit for introducing me to that elite band of paratroopers. So
yeah. It's something it's amazing that they go through what they went through, but also they're able to share that with people as well, because it's often the case that they're not. So for them to actually be able to do that with you, I think is, as you mentioned rightly, the trust had to be there for that to happen.
Right.
So it's if someone was going to go into a job where they were to interview someone with a past in a similar kind of way, what advice would you give them going into that?
I definitely done my homework beforehand, just in the book world. I had pulled off several full-length biographies, so it was a combination of doing your work beforehand, and then when opportunity knocks, being ready to say yes, even if that opportunity is scary.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine where I'd be now if I had said no to writing Lieutenant Compton's memoirs. So it was it was in 06, 07. I just started writing full time, a year or two into it, and I was wide-eyed, and to say I was nervous was an understatement. But when opportunity knocks, be ready to strike hard.
So now, as someone who's written multiple award-winning books since that, how do you feel approaching a new book now? Do you feel very much confident about what you're writing, or is every story still a challenge?
That's a great question. I did a book with Derek Coleman Jr. He was the fullback for the Seahawks right after they'd won the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and he was saying that after they had just won the Super Bowl, they're in the locker room, and Coach Carroll is talking to him, and he's saying, "Okay, guys, what is the most important game of your life?" And they're like, "Well, the Super Bowl." And he's like, "Wrong. The most important game of your life is the game we're gonna play this weekend. That's what matters." So that's how I approach the book world. It's like every book I write, it doesn't matter what you've done in the past. I mean, it does matter, but every book you write, when you're writing it, that is the most important project that requires all your focus. That's the Super Bowl that you gotta hit Sunday after Sunday.
That's amazing. Great advice. Okay, so let's bring back on Tosca to the show, and we will look at kind of how you guys work together, because writing as a duo, Chris, as you mentioned, approaching a threesome, it's a very decent thing to do, but I imagine very tricky. So both of you together, do you bring different sort of advantages to the way you write to each other's work? And how do you kind of work together? How does that process work? Open to any of you.
Marcus, you start the story.
Tosca writes like a dancer, and I write like a journalist. I started the process having a lot of respect for Tosca as a writer. I had read a number of her books, and so even to go back in time a little bit, I started a manuscript in 2010. I mean, this book we're talking about here was a 12-year process all through. And when it began, it was unfunded. It was a passion project. I just worked on it in bits and pieces when I had a spare moment. And I had read an oral history project about the Bataan Death March. Just was fascinated with the subject. It was like, why have I never heard of this before? And now that I've heard of it, I'm just so fascinated with it. And I have a lot of respect for oral history. I've actually done a couple of oral history projects. The downside of oral history is that it doesn't immerse the reader in the subject. It just kind of like skims over the trees often as guys are sort of telling their stories. So I wanted to create this immersive experience where a reader could be in that era and just sort of feel what they felt and feel all the highs and lows of that journey. And that's why I started this book. I worked on it for 7 years. I finally had a completed manuscript. I showed it to a number of early readers just to kind of gauge their feedback. And the response that I got was that it was good. It was very good. But I knew it wasn't great. Like, it was kind of that B+, A- level. And I wanted to take it to A+. I wanted it to be just the absolute best it could be, because we were shining the spotlight on the guys who had actually been there and done the fighting. And they deserved it. So I was talking to my agent. He's like, "Yeah, you've been working on this thing for so long. Probably you're just too close to the canvas. why don't you bring in a collaborative writer, help you get some perspective, and then take this book over the top together. That's when I called Tosca and said, hey, let's work.
Wow.
So that was 2017, I think. And I knew Marcus because I had endorsed one of his other novels several years before. But when he called me up and he told me about the project, I had not heard about the Bataan Death March. I was not familiar with this chapter of World War II history. So he filled me in and I was like, okay, it sounds good. Let's do it. And then I added 5 years to the process. So, 12 years altogether. But something really unusual happened with that I think is very unusual in a partnership. And that is that when I said yes, Marcus started handing me material, including his drafts. And he said, go for it. And I think this is really rare within the writing community because it shows a massive amount of trust. It shows very low ego. And it made me able to be free to dive in and look around and pull things apart and do my own research and add the best of what I could to the manuscript. So it's been great. And I think we each are aware of the strengths we bring to the table, but we also bring a lot of humor as well and a lot of respect for one another.
So talk us through that in terms of, obviously Marcus hands over the early drafts and all his notes and things like that. And I'm guessing that you sit there and you read through it. Then what do you do in terms of, the first thing that I would probably do is obviously digest everything that I've just read and then think what I could bring to the table. But it's very different just thinking about it, but then actually doing it. So how did that process come about and what did you do?
Well, there's a lot of reading. So as you said, first reading the manuscript, really digesting it, kind of analyzing it too. So I'm not reading just as a reader, but I'm also reading with the left side of my brain. And then research, because I really needed to get up to speed. So in addition to the manuscript, Marcus also sent me some books. And then I started my own research. And that's something that I love to do and that I'm known for in my own books. And so just reading survivor accounts, researching not only the Philippines, but Mobile, Alabama, the American South, where these boys grow up and where we have a dual timeline in this story. So where the timeline takes us back to on occasion as a respite from the war. And so really doing a lot of research and also just kind of mapping the whole story out and saying, where do I feel like we could do more? Where do I feel like I as a reader, I want to know more? How can we raise the stakes? How can we give readers more of what they want? But also, how can we continue to fulfill Marcus's original mission, which is to put the reader solidly in the midst of the story. So you're not just reading it like you're reading nonfiction, but this is in first person present tense. So you are in the thick of what's going on in the Philippines. And that was the whole purpose, is to put the reader directly in the middle of the action.
Yeah, it sounds like an incredible process. But Tosca, how did you feel being asked to come onto this project that had already been taking a long time to create what had got to at that point? Did you feel kind of any intimidation at joining the process, or did you feel an opportunity to grasp this and take it forward?
Well, both. And World War II is a really different time period for me. My historical fiction usually is 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And so I do ancient historical fiction. So this was intimidating in that there's still people alive who know stuff and have items from this time in history and remember things and can tell the stories. And so that part's intimidating.
Yeah.
But, we've all got these stories that have kind of been haunting us for years. And so to come into that process on this story is a great privilege and was a lot of fun. And then we're both writing other books in the meantime in between too. So
Marcus, I was going to say, obviously, you're in that point where you said, like, from your whole writing career, you sound like a pen for hire in terms of you started as a freelance doing jobs like that you were assigned to sort of do, but you said yourself that this was a passion project and something that you'd spent an awfully long time putting together. So how did it feel when you handed all of those manuscripts over and that you just kind of, left it alone for a little bit. Like your agent said, you're probably too close to the canvas. So was that a really nerve-wracking experience? Try and talk us through that.
Oh yeah. Take my baby, please. Yeah.
I couldn't have done it.
I had just read a biography of Jackie Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and when she was in her editing years in New York, she had given a writer this piece of advice. She had said, "Just try and be as free as you can be." And I thought, man, I'm going to file that away somewhere. So when I handed all the stuff over to Tosca, I went, "That's what I'm going to say." And sure enough, I said, "Hey, Tosca, here it is. Just be as free as you can be." Because I did have this sense that if I am trying to micromanage her, if I'm sort of hovering over her shoulder, then she is not going to do her best work. And I want her best work. I want this manuscript to be the best work possible. And so it was kind of a deep breath and boy, just suck in that lungful of air and hand over that child and do with it what you want to do with it. And Tosca, to her credit, is a phenomenal researcher herself, and so she dismantled the book. I was trying to do too many things in the initial plot, and then she did her own research just to double check that I had done everything accurately. And she worked on it a couple of years, and finally we had this manuscript that we began to pass back and forth, and then blend it all into one consistent voice. And that was really, I think, the part that it became fun, even to use that word, where we did have each person sort of had non-negotiables, but it was vision casting. Like, I feel really strongly about this paragraph or this line or this word, and here's my reasons for it. And we would debate that out, and it was always pretty good natured. Like, we're not sort of combative people to begin with, and I think we just got a stronger manuscript in the end. Consistently, we would ask ourselves, can we beat something? Like titling, we had 50 titles at one point, or 85 titles, and they were good working titles, but always the question was, can we top it? Can we get something better? Can we get something more snappy? Can we just, can we beat it?
Nice, that's great. I mean, when you talked about the process of working together and making it all streamlined, how do you ensure that both of your writing complements each other and doesn't kind of reflect each other in the wrong ways?
Arm wrestling.
Yeah.
We didn't have too much as in the way of fisticuffs, but one thing that I think is really smart that we did that I like to do in my own fiction is we hired editors, freelance editors, to go through our manuscript before we ever submitted it, and to say, hey, where is this working? Where is it not?
Okay.
Where can we improve? I'm a big believer in investing in your own writing with that. Is it cheap? No. But, did we sell it better? Did we, end up with a better product or story at the end? Absolutely.
Yeah. The directive there is really to them, help us ask all the hard questions we can on this side of publication. And these editors are not paid to be kind. They're paid to be cranky. And you want that. You want people saying, okay, that whole chapter, that kind of sucks. Get that out of there. Or end this chapter here. All of these next 5 paragraphs, get them out of here. And they did. I mean, they were. We had 3, didn't we?
3. We had 3, and they each had their own different things. And I'm so grateful for each of them.
Yep.
Amazing. If you could then, before we go on to talk about the story, give one piece of advice each when it comes to working in collaboration with someone else, what advice could you give?
Well, mine is, it's one, but it's 2 parts. So the first is choose wisely. Choose wisely, meaning know that you're choosing someone you can trust, who's bringing strengths to the table that complement yours, that are not the same as yours, but that complement yours.
Okay.
Yeah, and as I was saying, I had read probably 5 or 6 of Tosca's books to begin with, just because they interested me. So I knew I had this intrinsic sense of respect for this writer. Tosca writes details. She writes in layers, which I really like. She's often saying one thing, and then there's kind of another layer on top of it that you can sometimes catch if you're really tuned into it. So yeah, respect was important, and I'd say we kept it just like a silly running email dialogue that was helpful. If you're passing manuscripts back and forth at 3 a.m, which was often happening, you need that sense of levity in your relationship. Like, why work with people you don't want to work with, right? And if you can find somebody you're going, this is a fun person and smart and knowledgeable and lots of respect there. And so, yeah, let's have some fun while we're doing this.
Amazing.
Without going too much into, the novel as a whole, because obviously we're going to do a little bit of that in a minute. Were there any moments when you got a manuscript back from either email and you were like, whoa, like that really shocked me, or I wasn't expecting that? And can you sort of explain a little bit about what that was?
One thing that always stands out to me, and I'm so grateful for this feedback now as we read the reviews. This was a really tough time in World War II history. It was very gritty, extremely grueling, very bleak. It's a miracle anyone lived through it. And one of the pieces of feedback we had from one of the editors was, this is a lot, this is a lot, this is a lot. And we had to be conscious of the fact that these are human, emotional, sensitive readers that are reading this. And as we talked about, we are putting them smack dab right in the middle of everything going on in first person. They're living the experience through the main character. And so it became really important to pick and choose the kind of difficulties and hardships that we were going to put our characters through, because the list of those things that happened is very long and very exhausting. And so I think we had to be very judicious in our choices.
That was definitely a lesson learned, and one we discussed sort of ad infinitum there, where you have a book that's so much grit and so much bloodshed. If all you give the reader is intensity, then the reader never lifts, and it kind of loses its intensity. And so every once in a while, you got to lift the reader out of the blood, out of the grit, out of the muck, and go, okay, life is flowers and trees, and take a deep breath, and then we can go back in. And it actually keeps its sense of power if you can lift out of the muck every once in a while.
This might be a bit of a strange question, but it might not also for someone who wants to write similar stories, because as you mentioned, this is generational. It's a close generation connection to us as well, that granddaughters, grandsons, whatever, might be reading the stories of their grandparents in this sense. Do you ever sort of fictionalize the sort of the horrific side of this story, or anything in that sense to make the story more impactful, or do you kind of just stay really true to kind of what the story was in that sense?
Everything in our novel, this is a novel, it is fiction, but everything's inspired by true stories of what happened to survivors. So it's kind of a quilt. It's a knitting together of so many things that really happened. There was nothing we needed to sensationalize at all, because it was all just atrocious, really.
We sometimes get that question from readers, almost in a sense of skepticism, like, are you sure that all this stuff really happened to, like, one guy or three guys? And we're like, yeah, actually it did.
Yeah.
I'm still interviewing World War II veterans, although they're getting few and far between. The last two gentlemen that I've interviewed have been 101 and 103, with both super clear memories. And so, yeah, these stories, they're coming from the guys, and it happened.
Incredible.
So how do you decide then, when you're writing from first person, like how much sensory detail to put in? Because, some people will be like, the smells, the taste, the sounds, and all that sort of stuff. And if you do that, I know there's a lot of authors out there that are after a really visceral reaction. Like some people go, I'm going to write this scene and I hope people, vomit everywhere as a result. Like, I'm not saying you tried to do that, but
It's like the tale of Scrody McBoogerballs from South Park.
yeah. But you know, some authors do that.
Like who's the guy who wrote Fight Club, right? Like Chuck
Yeah.
Palahniuk?
Yeah.
Like that's exactly what he's going for, right? He wants people to pass out at his book readings, and literally they do.
So how do you decide what's a good?
With us, it's not a process of trying to create horror in our readers so much, but it is we want to shine the spotlight on real world events, and then let the readers' emotions be true to that, I would say.
Brilliant.
I always think of the camera being, on the main character's shoulder. So what we choose, what we hear, what we see, it's, there's a GoPro following the main character around. And so that's kind of always the filter when I think of writing from that first person.
Okay. All right. What we're going to do, I'm going to play the part 2 video, despite not playing the part 1 video. Sorry, Chris. And then we'll talk all about The Long March Home, and you guys can let the audience know about that story. And we'll go into some detail about the book. So part 2, here we go. What's the story? Okay, then it's time to find out who's well versed in the pitch of this story. Is it Marcus or Tosca?
Tosca, take it away.
No pressure at all. Well, this is the story. If you see the cover, you can tell this is the story of 3 best friends. The main character is Jimmy Propfield. He is a pastor's son living in Mobile, Alabama. His 2 best friends are Hank and Billy. And then their 4th best friend is Billy's oldest sister, Claire, who also becomes the love interest in the book. And if you had a hardcover, you would be able to see that there is an image of somebody who's left at home and has the letters also. Nice. So she's the love interest of the main character, and maybe of Hank as well. You never know. And so these guys start off in the Philippines. They're posted there with the 31st Infantry. Life seems beautiful and wonderful. It's a plum posting. It was highly desirable, even more than Hawaii. And life is great until December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor is bombed. And what I did not know before Marcus called me in 2017 is that within 10 hours of Pearl Harbor being bombed, the Philippines is plunged into war, and they are bombed by Imperial Japan as they come in with their planes from Formosa, which is Taiwan now. And so these boys are plunged into war. They fight until the Allied surrender of April 9th. When about 10,000 American soldiers and 60,000 Filipino soldiers all surrender and are marched 60 miles in 6 days from the Bataan Peninsula to a POW camp, not being allowed to stop for food, water to drink, even brackish water from a carabao, water buffalo, wallow. If you fall down, if you collapse, if you try to help somebody, if you try to pick a mango, you're bayoneted or you're shot or you're beheaded. And for those who have survived the war, which was a war of logistics as much as anything, because the Allied soldiers were outmanned, outgunned, outprovisioned, everything, hungry, starving, sick with malaria and dysentery. For those who survived that and then survived the march, it's only the beginning of almost 4 years of POW life. So this is the story of 3 best friends who have vowed to all make it home together. And then every now and then we go back in time to see them growing up and see how they developed these bonds of brotherhood that have made their mutual survival so important and also so feasible for them.
Wow.
Well, that was a fantastic pitch. Well done.
Well, thank you.
It's incredible. The story is unbelievable, although it is real. Marcus, why did you choose this story? What attracted you to it?
Yeah, so it all started actually back in, I want to say 06, 07, when I was working with Lieutenant Buck Compton. And so after his book came out, it was a national bestseller, and he was in his late 80s, but he was still speaking all over the country, just a remarkable man. So his daughter, Tracy, had become a good friend, and she called me up and said, "Hey, Marcus, my dad is getting to the place where he needs a little bit of help navigating airports and things like that. Would you like to be his traveling companion for a couple of these trips?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, sign me up."
Wow.
And Buck had a remarkable memory. I mean, like he couldn't remember necessarily what he ate for breakfast yesterday, but then again,
I can't remember
either,
what I ate for breakfast yesterday.
but he can remember in great detail what happened in his warriors. So we'd be sitting in an airport lounge, and he'd be telling me all about Bastogne or Operation Market Garden or you name it. So one day we're sitting in an airport lounge, and he's telling me all about the Battle of the Bulge. It's winter, 30 degrees below zero. They're in Belgium, outgunned, outmanned, just miserable conditions. Buck's, just huddling in a foxhole type thing, shooting at the enemy and getting shot at. And I remarked something about, "Man, that was just so difficult for you." And Buck stops and he goes, "Yeah, it was difficult, but at least I wasn't in the Pacific. Those guys had it really rough." And that was the comparison. It was just like, okay, so that's coming from Buck.
Yeah.
What was it for the guys in the Pacific that they had it really rough compared to Bastogne? I mean, good grief. What was that all about? So that began the journey of discovery for me.
First of all, I'm insanely jealous of these conversations you've had. But secondly, the Pacific, the TV series, which obviously is fantastically created, I've started watching with my son recently as well. So it's very interesting this show has come along at the same time. And just from the very off, where the soldiers get disconnected from the Navy and the supplies are cut, they're dealing with the basics of lack of food and provisions. It's just something so difficult to deal with in normal circumstances, not to mention in hot areas without water and all of those things. So it's incredible to even comprehend the story of the Long March Home, because I don't think you could put that into your imagination in the right way. But how did you go about discovering the story and actually finding out the facts to put it into the story?
Yeah, so historian Adam Makos is a good buddy of mine, and he had spent about 2 years developing contacts with the Marines in K-35 who had fought in the Pacific that was featured in that miniseries. So he and I worked on an oral history project that was eventually titled Voices of the Pacific. And during that time, we interviewed a number of the veterans who had either been featured in the HBO series or they hadn't been featured, but they were all in that outfit. And so, that began probably the delving into reality. Other than that, it was a lot of books. Donald Knox did the oral history project. Death March. That was really the cornerstone. He had written that in the, I want to say 80s, when the guys themselves were in their mid 60s. So it was pretty fresh in their memory as well. So it's a very valuable resource.
One of the things that I want to ask, and I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this question, because I don't want to say this time period is the gift that keeps on giving for creative writers. But I've just said it now, so I'm going to stick with that. But, there's so many stories that you could delve into that would tie in nicely alongside the characters in the Long March Home. Have you ever thought of collaborating again and giving us a different side, maybe where your characters are just on the peripheral, and we've got a different narrative that's again equally as interesting for us to read, but we kind of writers do it all the time, like Stephen King. You've got universes that kind of blend into each other, whereas with this time period, you've kind of got it anyway. There's so many fascinating stories that you could look into. Is that something that you've considered now that you've collaborated on one book and it's been so successful?
Well, it's something we could definitely look into. I mean, there's so many adjacent stories, including, and we included a female freedom fighter who's a real historical figure in this novel, named Philippa Kulala. There's some guys that were able to escape and became guerrilla fighters. There's so many interesting stories that could go along with it. So I don't know. It's certainly food for thought.
Maybe we've just sparked the idea for a little series.
Do we have to like pay you a percentage or anything?
No, I'll just be happy as a reader. So yeah, you do what you want with that.
Chris, they're both thinking we just finished one project. Come on. Yeah. No, it's
12
incredible.
years. We're still resting.
We're both still really young. You could probably get another 4 or 5 books out.
Yeah, next time we'll be done in 11. So,
We're speeding up.
I was going to say the process of empathetic envisioning always fascinates me. When Clint Eastwood did, he told the story in 2 different movies, one through the eyes of the Allies and one through the eyes of Imperial Japan. Flags of Our Fathers and it's right on the tip of my tongue, Letters from Iwo Jima, I think were the 2 movies. And it's the same story, just told through different sides. Which is fascinating for Clint to do this, just to go, okay, have you ever considered an argument through the eyes of your enemy?
Yeah.
Because they have reasons for doing what they are doing as well. And they have hopes and they have family members at home. And wow, that process really puts things into a completely different perspective.
One of the books I read recently that I really, really enjoyed in the sense of the kind of perspective sense is All Quiet on the Western Front. That was such a well-detailed book in World War II. But yeah, I haven't read many others it showing an opposite perspective. Would you ever consider that yourself?
Yeah, I think it'd be fascinating to write a book from the eyes of these, quote unquote, the enemy. And yeah, difficult, but it can be done. Yeah.
I think what Marcus said is absolutely right, though. I mean, everybody has their own motivations for doing what they do. I think that's one of the fascinating parts about telling stories that we think we're familiar with.
Amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, guys, in the minute, we are going to go on to the final part of the show, which is community questions. If you have questions, I've seen one come in earlier and I saved it, for our author guests tonight or for any of us, please send them in. And we will ask them if they were appropriate. I'm sure they will be. And we will ask a few staple questions along the way as well. But before we go on to that, Chris, do you have any more questions on The Long March Home? Or do you have any more things you want to say about the book before we move on, Tosca or Marcus? Just put you on the spot.
I have something fun to say. After working on this for so long, Marcus and I met in person for the very first time last October. We had never met in person, and we have only met in person once at our publishers for meetings. So that was kind of a fun, surreal day to finally meet this friend that you've been taking this journey with for so long.
And who is taller?
I think Marcus is.
You can never tell on camera. You can never tell.
I forgot. I was wearing heels, though, so who knows?
I suppose something that I'm interested in terms of with the book, are there any surviving family members that you have reached out to as a result of writing this book, and what was their interpretation of it?
That's more Marcus's area. He's the one who's in touch with.
The first the 3 main characters are all composites and fictionalized characters. So there's nobody sort of direct for the 3 main ones. I was speaking at an event last night, and it was amazing afterward how many people came up to me and just said, my grandfather or my uncle or everybody has got somebody they know who fought in the war. And so that there is a sense of, thanks for writing this to help shine the spotlight and make sure people never forget. Vietnam veterans even will say, because I did a book with a Vietnam veteran a couple of years ago, and they have said thank you for, because they didn't receive the best deal when they came home. And so if we can say thanks, man, you were just doing your job. That's a pretty cool thing too. So.
Yeah, I did a charity walk last year through France and in Belgium for along the Western Front of World War One, and that really kind of surprised me about how many people there, young and old, that were doing that charity walk because of the connections in their family. And what was amazing about that is that we got a lot of stories on the ground in the locations of the battles or where the battles were, and there was one particular area where they obviously know the people who organized the walk knew the areas and the people who were on the charity walk. So there were a few occasions where they said, well, your grandfather choosing someone in the group was actually in this battle, and they explained it on the ground, which was really emotional, moving for everybody there. But it's incredible those things still happen, and that if you have got those connections, you can get to have that experience. I think it's amazing.
Definitely.
Cool. Right, so we're going to move on to part 3 of the show, which is community questions. Please send us the questions in, guys, and we are going to get to ask our usual random ones. So part 3, community questions. All right, then, Chris, start us off with the community questions.
Yeah, I mean, I feel daft asking this one. So one of the community questions that we have that we ask on the show is, if you could take any fictional character and make that character your own, which character would you choose and why?
Wow. From this book or just anywhere?
Just anywhere within fiction that you wanted to take that character, do something with it, and maybe it's create an entire novel, maybe it's put them into a story that you've already written, any of those things.
A historical character or a fictional character? I'm sorry.
Fictional.
From TV, books, film, anything at all.
I would take The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway, and then what happened after the whole fish incident. I mean, how did he continue on from there, right? Did he go vacationing in Florida? What there's a whole other chapter to that anyways readers just want to know. So
amazing.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
That's a good one. It's kind of fictional, but kind of not. I've always been fascinated with King Arthur, but I've always wanted to tell the story through Guinevere's eyes, and it's been done before, but that's something I have to do before I die, is I need to do an Arthurian story. So
nice. That is passion. Whenever anyone says that, I have to do this before I die.
I have to.
There's a commitment there and some passion. And
it means I can't die for a while.
Brilliant. Okay, the next question. If you could change the ending of anything, and again, down the fictional route, whether it's TV, film, or book, what ending are you going to change and why?
Man, these are tough questions. You guys are hard. That's great.
Yeah.
The ending of something.
Yes.
I never felt like the ending of the third Hunger Games, the final Hunger Games, was very satisfying. And this is something that my sons and I talk about, my oldest son especially. We kind of feel like, I don't know if we feel very satisfied with that. So if I could go back and redo that, I'm not sure how I would do it, but if I could change that ending a little bit, that's one we've actually talked about in our house. So
what are the suggestions that are flying around your house? What are you and your sons talking about in terms of
with the Hunger Games, you mean, or with?
Yeah.
Well, just the fact that, it's kind of a spoiler, but she ended up with this one guy, and we're not sure if she should have ended up with him, and we're not sure about, one or two people who died. So, there's people you're always rooting for, and maybe that's just where the chips fall. But you kind of hope. When you're emotionally invested, you kind of hope sometimes that things turn out a little differently. So,
yeah,
cool.
Good answer. I like it.
Yeah, Marcus, have you got one?
I had a friend who he just posted this on social media this morning, where he asked Chat AI, the new chat bots, to create a summary of the Book of Revelation as told through the eyes of like a Western story.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, howdy partner, there's dragons in the sea and they come riding over the horizon. So, I wouldn't want to say that I would change the ending of the Bible, so to speak, but there's a lot of blood in there. And maybe to make it a Western themed Book of Revelation would be a great story.
I feel so boring now in comparison.
I'm sure people would read that,
I'm going to change the Hunger Games. I'm going to change the Bible.
You're not aiming high enough, clearly.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm going to throw in another staple question. Well, it's not a staple question because we
These
never asked
questions
it
are
before.
so hard.
But obviously, your partnership has worked so well. If you could collaborate with any other current living or deceased author, who would you choose and why?
Somebody with deep pockets.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
John Grisham, give me a call. Come on, buddy. 60,
Come on,
60,
John,
40. I'll take it, buddy.
Yeah.
On a purely like Cormac McCarthy is probably our greatest right now. And no offense, Tosca, because you are phenomenal as well. Buckets of respect there. But just to be able to work with somebody who is, sort of won the Pulitzer and every word, like he doesn't even use punctuation because he's just so cool. So what would it be like to work with somebody like that? I don't know.
Yeah, who needs
that's a good response. Yeah, I like that one.
I think I'd have to say Colleen Hoover, somebody who's like really at the top of their game right now and talked about deep pockets. So,
yeah,
that'd be good.
You'd be a TikTok sensation.
Okay, now I have to rethink my existence and my life choices, but sure.
We got a question from Jake, which I want to ask this because I kind of felt like I needed the answer to this earlier on. Why do you feel it was important for you to write in the first person in regards to The Long March? And do you feel like it could have stronger in another perspective?
I think that the reason is because we were, as Marcus said, really going for that immersive experience.
Yeah.
And when you solidly seat the reader inside the perspective of your main character with that really deep first person, and then you go present tense, it's like being in that thing that you're in a Disneyland ride, the vehicle that you go through the haunted house in. And after a while, that vehicle you're on becomes totally transparent. And so you're going through the whole ride and you're seeing everything through the two eyes of your main character. And I can't think of a better way to put the reader right on the front of the character's consciousness than to do it that way.
Amazing.
Did you ever try it in second person?
Second person's tricky. It's tricky.
I read a Dennis Lehane novel. I hope I said his surname right there. And it was written entirely in second person. And it was just, it was almost too immersive, if that makes sense. But yeah, maybe even just a little snippet would be, do you know, like some authors are asked to do like a little section of a side story, so to speak, of a character. Maybe that be a little avenue that you could go down and try in different perspectives and just see what people thought. I mean, I am suggesting.
Apparently, Chris is your new manager.
Maybe you could do a different outlook.
Yeah. If you ever get stuck in your amazing New York Times, if you ever get stuck in your New York Times bestselling careers, just turn to Chris Hooley. I'm sure we can work it out for you.
Well, I like the idea of being experimental. Actually, I mean, I think there's a lot of merit to experimenting with different points of view. I almost said POV points of view, and all different kinds of storytelling. Absolutely,
yeah, it's a fascinating question. And I'm going to butcher his name here, but it's like Juno Diaz, I think is his name. Wrote a book in second person, so it's like you are walking down the street, you say hi to the guy, and you're just sort of in the first opening paragraphs, you're like, whoa, like nobody does this, but he's doing it and pulling it off quite well. And it's a fascinating device.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to ask you one more. Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, Chris. I was going to say, because I feel like I've died on YouTube asking that question. I'm going to ask you our morbid question, which is a staple question that we always ask, and it's: you're on your deathbed, again, morbid, but you're looking back at your writing career. What is success to you? What would you be happy with?
I don't plan to die lying down. I'm going to jump a shark into a volcano, and that's the way I'm going to go out. So I would say man, no regrets. Each project, when you take it on, there's reasons for doing it. And if you write with a sense of integrity and write with an eye to the reader, hopefully you die in that volcano just fine.
Amazing. Love that answer.
Great answer.
I would like to hope that I can look back and say I wrote without fear. And that's hard to do because most writers contend with fear on a minute by minute basis when they're working. So I'd like to be able to look back and say, I conquered fear enough to tell this story, as Marcus says, with integrity. And I did right by my readers, and I entertained them, and I gave them something to inspire them.
Amazing.
Nice. We actually asked Anthony Horowitz to expand, and we said, if you could decide what you wrote on your tombstone, what would you choose? Now I know that's going really morbid, but can you think of something on the spot that you're going to write on there?
Did he? Do you remember what he said? Because I can't.
That's hard.
Yeah.
He did say something about James Bond and Sherlock Holmes, and then something about resting. But I'm sure people who watch that show, would be able to go back to it. But we never asked that before. We've never asked people to expand on the morbid question that we had. But I just think it's brilliant because it's like, you get what we did ask him as well. We asked him about the tombstone, but we also asked him about if somebody was taking over his characters, what he would want them to do with them. Again, which is a fascinating concept, in terms of someone inheriting your work and your characters. And obviously, the beauty of this is it lasts on YouTube forever. So if somebody was going to take over your books at some point in time, which is possible, your family might say, do you know what? I've got this creative estate that I'm going to entrust somebody else to do, carry on the work that these people have started. Again, what would you want to do for that? Because I feel like this could be used at some point in the future.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, Chris. Yeah. It asks you to distill all of your life down to one sentence. I mean, it's the Twitterverse of tombstones, right?
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And on a serious note, I would say something like almost like a line from the Coldplay song where you're like, you are meant for more than this. Mm-hmm. I do think we try and both Tosca and I, we write with a sense of the transcendent, where we go, yes, the world is here and now, and yet there's undoubtedly something beyond this. And as we're journeying through this life, we have to keep an eye on the horizon where there's something beyond that. And I think that's what I would want to be remembered for.
I like that.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, we're gonna finish up because I'm aware we're over our time, and I don't want to keep you guys up too late, even though it's earlier in the US. Where can people find out more about yourselves, and where can they buy this lovely looking book, The Long March Home?
Well, the book has a landing page, and it's simply thelongmarchhomebook.com, and so you can find out about the book there. But you can find me at toscalee.com.
I'm at marcusbrotherton.com. Ask for the book at a bookstore near you. If you're overseas, your branch of Amazon, whatever that is undoubtedly going to have it. So
amazing, guys! Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, as I mentioned at the start of the show, there is so much more we could talk to you both individually about and together about, and we could almost pull a second interview show out of this, I'm sure. But thank you so much, and for taking your time to come and share your stories with us. It's been amazing. From me, thank you, and Chris, thank you again for your brilliant questions.
This has been super fun, you guys ask hard questions, and I wish I had a drink handy after all. So.
Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great weekend, and I don't know what are your plans now for the weekend. Have you got anything interesting happening?
I've got a book signing at another city here in Nebraska this weekend. Nice. So that's always fun. Good to get out with readers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the sun is out in the Pacific Northwest, so it's get out with the kids and enjoy the sunshine. Superb.
Right. Thank you so much, guys. Everyone watching, thank you for tuning in. If you're listening back on this or watching it back, thank you again. Please leave a comment. Subscribe, hit the like button. If you have questions, follow-up questions for Tosca or Marcus, hit us up on Twitter. We'll pass them on or tag them. I'm sure they'll have time to get back to you And if you buy The Long March Home, which you should do, let us know what you think about it as well. Thank you very much, guys. We will see you next week, and have a nice weekend. Bye-bye, everybody.
You.